Welcome to the Aeon Future Health Podcast. I'm Vanessa, your host, lead fitness coach at Aeon. Today, we will be talking about body composition and weight loss with Dr. Bastian. What do you have to say about this major topic?
Oh man, I mean, there's so many things to dive into. I think one of the first things that we really need to understand is the difference between weight loss and body composition changes. And why we value body composition generally over weight loss as an initial metric. So, really, for as long as we've been trying to maintain our weight, the only thing we've had access to is the scale. And so everybody has used that as a metric for health. But the truth is, it's a bad metric. You can be short and strong and technically be heavy. You can be, tall and skinny and still have, different body composition changes that put you at risk for morbidity and mortality. So I think the key thing that has changed perhaps in the last 5 or 10 years is this shifting paradigm from using weight as the ultimate driver towards body composition. And now that we have things like our 3D body scanner, which can address things more readily around like estimations of, percent body fat, visceral fat, and muscle mass, you can get way more granular, way more detailed about your tracking, which ultimately I think just helps people create a better roadmap for what they need for their health.
Yeah. I actually love the Staiku scanner that we use here because, as you mentioned, there are different metrics on there and not just the weight on the scale. So when people see that their muscle mass is going up and the inches are coming off, and maybe that number on the scale hasn't changed, people are really happy that their muscle is increasing and body fat percentage is going down. So those are great metrics, as you mentioned, to look for instead of just that one on the scale.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, to the next step of that, talking about body fat, not all body fat is the same when it comes to health optimization and longevity. So, when people are thinking about wanting to look better, right? Usually they're talking about their subcutaneous fat. That's the fat sort of overlying your skin. You carry it in your belly, around your belly. You carry it, around your glutes and things like that. So that's an easier fat to access generally. But it doesn't carry the same serious risks and consequences as other fats. So when we think about other fats, specifically visceral fat, which kind of surrounds your internal organs, and especially fat sort of within your liver, that fat is different in the sense that it has a way higher rate of increasing markers of inflammation, like interleukin-6 and TNF-alpha, that put you at increased risk of, some pretty serious diseases, increased risk of heart attack, increased risk of stroke, increased risk of different types of cancers. And so our focus is really on not just helping people to, trim that subcutaneous fat, which is important, but also, let's keep an eye on some of these other numbers that, for your overall health and longevity actually have some pretty significant impact.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And a question someone may want to know, is there a way to target your visceral fat or your subcutaneous fat? Or does it just comes off where it does?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really great question. I think ultimately the idea of targeting fat, period, I think is generally a misnomer. It's hard to target any specific focal area of fat. However, what we do know is if, insulin is a massive driver of some of those deeper tissues of fat, massive driver of your visceral fat, which is, again, just around your organs, and massive driver of fat that gets stored around your liver, which is especially important because that fat sort of in and around your liver, often called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, can actually lead to liver hardening, and then eventually liver scarring, liver cirrhosis. And so by focusing on things that we know can help bring your insulin levels down over time, we might not be able to target that fat specifically, but certainly we can take away some of the drivers that are required to get that fat storage in the first place.
A common myth, and I think we've heard this through the years, is eating fatty foods doesn't lead to, eliminating fatty foods or eating fatty foods, does it make us fatter? Does eating fat make us fat, or eliminating that from our diet, does that help? Like nutrition plays a huge role on this, but
Oh man, totally. So there's a couple myths to bust here. So the first one is that having a diet high in fat is going to increase your cholesterol. Only about 4 to 5% of your entire body's cholesterol is based on your dietary intake.
how much percent, sorry?
4 to 5.
4 to 5.
Yeah, so 90 to 95% of your body's cholesterol is genetics. It's based on how you create it in the first place. Secondly, eating fatty foods doesn't make you fat in isolation. But the trouble is that fatty foods contain a high density of calories.
Exactly.
And, calories in versus calories out. I mean, we should chat about that in a second, but it's not the fatty foods themselves. It's what large quantities of those fatty foods drive, which is things like metabolic syndrome, increased insulin, which then acts as the signaling property for these other pieces.
Exactly. And you kind of led us to our next topic here of calories in, calories out, what's important there. What you put into your body is really important for many of the things that you just mentioned, but also getting that energy in order to exercise and then in order to change that body composition that we keep wanting to promote here, rather than just the weight loss, increasing that muscle mass, right? So it really depends on what type of calories you're putting into your body in order to fuel the tank. That's what I like to say. Would you put water in your gas tank to make your car run, right? I don't want to continue to put fatty foods into my system or chips all the time in order to fuel my body. Kind of going on a little bit here, but it just is super important because, your insulin levels will go up. You talked about like just different hormones are going to be changed depending on what you put in your body too, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, the other really important thing that is only now shifting is this idea that look, ultimately calories in, calories out, the calories that you put in your body, those are critical pieces to weight management, critical pieces to body composition management, and crucial for fat loss, right? Finding those pieces. But I also feel like the medical community's done a massive disservice to people by saying that those are the only things that are involved, right? So the classic example is somebody will start on a diet, they'll have tons of success, they'll lose weight quickly, and then what happens? Well, they fall off the wagon, their weight climbs up, and they feel like that's on them, okay? And of course, habits are crucial to that. But there's a huge component of that, which is actually far more based in genetics than your hormones. So we know that you have hormones in your body that try and maintain your weight at a certain level. And these are really driven by lots of things from the environment, lots of things from us, in previous times where resources were scarce. So you didn't want to lose weight because then, you'd be at risk of starving. And so, one of these hormones is called leptin. Leptin actually signals when your fat cells are at a healthy stage for themselves. And when your weight goes down, your leptin goes down as well. And when your weight comes up to a space where it's healthy, or where it's most comfortable, I should say, your leptin then signals to your brain, yep, we've got enough. We can take it a little bit easier. And what happens when you diet and you're in that caloric restriction phase, right? You have not only leptin, but other hormones called ghrelin, which makes you feel hungry, and insulin. All of those work together to actually, when you're working through a fad diet of any kind, to make you feel more hungry. And they actually tell your brain to conserve calories more tightly, which is why people often sort of come down, hit this plateau, and then, it gets incrementally harder to lose weight beyond that piece. And so, we now know that one of the challenges behind weight loss that people used to think was just, weakness of will or inability to maintain a program is actually heavily based in genetics, and the hormones that interplay with those kind of things.
Interesting. So, a little topic that we can talk about here too, in regards to hunger, appetite, is Ozempic, which we do offer at Aeon.
Yeah.
What are your views on Ozempic and how it suppresses appetite?
So I think the first thing that people need to understand is Ozempic is by no means a miracle drug. People have this idea that they'll start this medication, they'll lose tons of weight, and everything will be perfect. Well, just as we discussed, weight loss and body composition is an intricate play of multiple different hormones coinciding with your lifestyle choices. Now, Ozempic does help if you've already implemented some of those lifestyle features. It does help to secrete a hormone called GLP-1, which acts really in two places. It acts centrally on the brain to make you feel more full, and it also acts on your gut to slow down transit through your gut. And the combination of those two pieces mean that it can help to promote weight loss after you've reached one of those plateaus. I really think it's used in two ways. I think there's value in the hormonal piece for people to be on it long-term who have long-term struggles with weight. But I also think it can be really helpful to get some of those behaviors in check. So when you have people who are struggling to make healthy changes, struggling to get their protein intake, struggling to intermittent fast, it takes time and mental energy to get those things started and get consistent with. And so I think it can be an effective tool once we've looked at some of these other treatments to help extend weight loss.
So I was just wondering, what is your approach to Ozempic?
That's a great question, and one I get asked quite a bit. So here's the thing. When we are talking about weight loss, we know that there's hormones at play that essentially allow you to achieve somewhere between 4 and 7% body weight loss before these hormonal signals kick in. Okay, you can do a lot for your body composition, can't do much to change the scale beyond that. Ozempic essentially helps patients to push past that number. And it does so really functioning in two ways. It acts centrally on your brain to make you feel less hungry, and it acts on your stomach and your intestine to slow down transit of food to make you feel more full. I think it can be a really good way, like a really good addendum, a really good add-on for patients once they have some of these other things in place, once they're already focused on nutrition or already focused on strength training and exercise, and they've reached some of those goals. It can be a great way to see improved results. And it's not just the scale. We know that Ozempic also helps to decrease the amount of fat you have around your liver. And that fat in particular, called your visceral fat, can be extremely inflammatory, increasing your risk of heart disease, heart attack, stroke, certain kinds of cancers. So trying to drive that down is really important for longevity. In the same tone, like any medication, Ozempic isn't without its risks, right? It's got side effects like bloating and constipation initially. It's a medication. It can be expensive. So I think for each patient, it's a real case-by-case assessment. But when you're using it in conjunction with some of these other integrative pieces, for many patients, it can be a really effective tool in the toolbox to improve your overall body composition.
If someone is eating a little bit less and they have less energy, and they still want to train, but they don't have the energy to train, what would you recommend?
Well, there's two pieces to that question. So number one is when patients are eating far too little and have severe caloric restriction, definitely that's going to impact their glycogen stores and how they work through some of those pieces, which is going to have a direct impact on how well they can train. And so finding a balance where you actually have the energy and you're fueled your body properly to hit the gym hard is important. The flip side is that many times with a gentle caloric restriction, you need some of that caloric restriction to see changes in your fat loss and your weight loss as well. And so trying to strike a balance between the two, where you have enough energy to do the activities that you want to do, and in the same tone, you're still running a gentle caloric restriction to increase your fat utilization, is a fine balance that's really required if you're trying to take an integrative approach to weight loss.
I think it can also be, I have different
Sure,
views
yeah.
on this a little bit, but I think it can be used as a tool for positive mindset in terms of that little extra push for the weight loss. What I mean by that is some people have tried everything and it's just not working and they get discouraged, right? So going on Ozempic and then kicking those healthy habits again, even if it's at 5 pounds, 10 pounds they need it in order to stick to those habits, I think it's a positive thing that way. But I want people to continue with exercising, getting enough protein in, just forming those great habits that they were going to need for life. Hormones are a different story, obviously. Like a lot of people struggle with that, as we've said, so they'll probably always need to be on it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that is so crucial to understand is one of the big myths that people have about Ozempic is that Ozempic is going to lead to muscle loss, right? So if you look at Ozempic in the Step 2 trial that they looked at, you do end up with some muscle loss, but you, as a proportion of the total weight, you end up with a greater fat to muscle loss ratio. A lot of that muscle mass can be conserved by doing resistance training while you're taking that medication. And similarly, the newer version of Ozempic called Mounjaro has another trial called a Mount 1 trial. And that trial actually showed like a ratio of 3-to-1 loss of fat loss to muscle. So when we're talking about all these drugs, looking at the scale as one piece of it, but maximizing that relationship between fat loss and muscle loss is a crucial component if you're trying to maintain for health and longevity.
And once again, what we promote here is building up that strength for longevity, not only aesthetics and fitness.
Yeah, and like we were talking about, there's no real way to do spot reduction for fat loss. When we're talking about exercise and training, like what do you think is the most effective for like if you're trying to lose fat?
It's a combination of exercise, nutrition, sleep, stress management. People say get at least that 7 to 8 hours of sleep, which is pretty tough if you're stressed too. So it's kind of managing it all, right? There's not one specific thing. I am a big promoter of resistance training, especially as we do get a little older, because then our bone mass is going to decrease and we want that too. And we get that through a lot of strength training. But just as good as strength training is cardiovascular exercise. So a combination of things. And I'm not talking about HIIT training and doing tons of sprints, but like moderation of things. And it really depends, I think, also where your hormones are at, if you're going to be doing some HIIT training as well, because that could change your cortisol levels, which is a stress hormone, which leads to just hugging in all that fat and not being able to lose it. So it's a combination of it all. There's not one special thing that's going to do it. Or if someone says, I want to lose, this fat around my belly, it's driving me crazy, we're not going to be doing a lot of sit-ups. Mm-hmm. It's a combination of it all.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like, to your point, it's so person dependent.
Very much
right?
so.
So, for patients who have high insulin resistance, right? We know that insulin is a signaling hormone to your fat cells to hold on to those fat cells more tightly and use glucose as your energy source. And so, for some people who are starting with high levels of insulin and have a long way to go, sometimes that gradual zone 2 training is a great place to start, because they need to build up their mitochondria, they need to build up their energy, and they need to gradually take down those insulin resistance levels. In the same tone, for someone who's already active, HIIT training can be, in my opinion, really effective, because it's a very effective way to increase fat metabolism. And then, I think it also helps to increase your fat metabolism burn even when you're done working out.
It's like strength training too. If you strength train, you're burning 24 to 48 hours after. A lot of just steady base cardio, though, I'm going to argue on that one, is just in that moment.
Oh, that's fascinating. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then, as you were mentioning just at the beginning, it's different for everybody, right? So like I was saying, HIIT training might not be the best for, women who are perimenopausal Their hormones are all over the place, so that's just going to stress their bodies out more and make them latch on to everything. So it's a fine line. So you have to do what works for you. It might take a little bit of time to get there or realize what's working for you. So that's where people get frustrated and they don't give themselves enough time to realize their body composition is not going to change in, 6 weeks time. It could take 12 weeks. It could take 5 to 6 months to change. So you have to continue at something instead of just dropping it right off the bat and saying, oh, this isn't working for me and you only gave it 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Right? It takes time, but you have to realize it does.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the other thing that I think is really interesting, and just from my own learning, is the recovery tech that we do here that I generally think helped to take down your cortisol levels. I actually am a really strong proponent. I think that's a really big piece to help balance some of these fat loss pieces, because when your cortisol is high, again, that signals your insulin to remain high, to avoid that fat loss and fat metabolism. So that integrative approach that you're talking about just seems like, it has to be implemented in some form or another, because it just seems like it's really the only way to create some really lasting results. Is that fair?
I agree completely. Yes.
I mean, medically, I think it's easy to say things and then, have some follow-up, but really, I think a lot of the change comes from the health coaches and the nutrition team working together. So when you have a patient come in, what do you prefer to do? Do you prefer to start them on like a more aggressive caloric restriction with intense activity versus a more stepwise change? Like, what makes the most sense for most clients? Or
if we want to set someone up for good results and positive outcome, a gradual approach is best. We're not a clinic who's going to promote, hey, let's get ripped for summer and get that bikini body on or competition body on, because that is a extreme goal. So we like to talk about realistic goals and what those healthy habits look like to get to those different goals. So not an extreme calorie deficit or exercising 6 days a week. It doesn't have to be like that, because I think people will eventually burn out, and it happens time after time. There's all these results in the beginning and you're hitting, these milestones, and then people just plateau. Realistic goals, talking about calories, talking about macros, what's in something, what they're going to be eating, exercise regime that's going to work for them, lifestyle, stress management, when they're going to get it in is really, really important. So we take more of that approach. It still happens, though, that people do end up plateauing and not end up losing after, several months, and they just don't. And then we look back and see what they were doing, and if they were listening to the plan, if they eliminated too many calories too quickly, if they were exercising too much. So it's all about balancing that out and seeing what we can work on, because if they hit it too hard in the beginning, obviously they're not going to be able to maintain that 6 months down the line.
And I kind of feel like the two things that I think are generally work very well for our patients is, number one, having a really integrative approach, right? So instead of just focusing on severe caloric restriction or just focusing on intensive exercise, being able to look at some of these other pieces, I think, are really valuable. And then the other thing that, we keep coming back to is, if you're only using the scale, you're kind of missing the point, because the aesthetics piece is so crucial, right? I get it. Everybody wants to look good and feel good in their own skin. I think that's something that we help people with all the time. The other component is focusing on what that body composition does to help promote your overall health and longevity. And so, by focusing more on resistance training, increasing your protein intake, trying to get your insulin levels down. I mean, those all have a massive impact on your overall health that go way beyond the scale.
Like in doing so, looking at your lifespan ahead of you, that energy you're getting from adding in that exercise, changing up your diet, You look at your young, we have some people who are a bit older and have grandkids and they want to keep up with their grandkids, and they finally are, right? Because they want to see them grow up. So those are really big wins for people, just to get that energy and go on that hike with their whole family, and they're the oldest ones there. So mindset like that is really huge.
Yeah, which I think sort of parlays into another really good question, which is like body composition changes, health optimization, longevity. It's a long-term game. How do you keep people motivated to sort of maintain that success once they've got it?
I think it's, as I said before, mindset, and what really in the end does matter. And we're trying to promote the long term and where you want to be, not just, hey, I lost that 50 pounds and I look great in these tights I put on when I was in my 20s, So it's a long term. What is important? Really realizing the why, I think, is a huge, huge thing. And when people know their why, that's going to be that mental change, and realize it's not just that weight on the scale.
Yeah. Yeah. And, like the other thing is oftentimes when you're carrying less fat and you have more energy, you feel better. And that's like a noble goal. Like, I don't want to dissuade that too much.
No.
But I think once you start putting in these habits and you really start to feel like yourself again with better energy, some of your hormone balances change, everything just is a little bit more easier to maintain.
And with that comes typically better sleep.
Yeah.
And we all know how important sleep is, and we sleep more, we're in a better state of mind and just happier and look at things a bit differently, right? Well, thank you so much for talking about body composition and weight loss today. I think it's a huge topic that we have a lot of questions about, and hopefully we've answered a lot of the viewers' questions.
Yeah, of course. And thanks for hosting, Vanessa. That was wonderful.
Thanks for having me.